Thank you for allowing me to talk at this august meeting. Really quite a large gathering. It looks great. So many people interested in this topic. I have to say my talk has changed almost completely from what I started out trying to put together this talk a few weeks ago, where I was focused on what are the issues, what are we trying to do, what are our goals, what are we trying to get to. Because of all of the interest and all the things that's come out since then, I'm bypassing what our goals are together. And let's say the people, at least most of us here, I think we're together. I'm saying let's put it as an assumption that we know what motivates that we have to share data, right? So let's not spend time, so I've taken out of my talk the motivation for why we share data, why we want to share research data, what we want to try to get out of that, and focus instead on two problems that are growing with trying to share data. And I specifically focus on that in the spirit of brainstorming to say, okay, here's some ideas about how we might get over those problems. And that's basically the point of my talk, as opposed to all of the process stuff that I've usually given talks about. So let's start with those common assumptions, right? That we need to share data, we need to put them in repositories, discipline-specific. I want to come back to that a little bit, as opposed to sort of like just neutral repositories that don't have metadata with them or something. Control vocabulary so that you can join them up and do analytics on them, normalize, et cetera, so that you can do something larger with the data, play into all of the hype around big data, if you will, but I'll talk a little bit more about that. So right now, the problem number one is a small portion of data are being shared, right? So that's part of why we're here, and there's lots of reasons for that. And so there's lots of barriers to sharing the data, lots of things that prevent researchers from openly sharing their data, making them available right away. Lots of issues going on there. And so maybe we can brainstorm a couple of ideas about how to get over some of those barriers. Part of my talk will be about that. And then there are problems with sustainable funding for those databases, which are growing enormously. The data themselves growing at least doubling every year, and the databases themselves, even in some of the hot areas, going between 10 and even upwards % of number of databases per year. So there's obviously, we're heading towards funding issues for keeping them going, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So the points of my presentation. So after this, you can go to sleep, which is why I made the slides back. The main points of the presentation is we can remove some of the barriers by sort of really developing rigorous processes and rigorous control vocabularies and everything, and get simplicity and efficiency out of doing data management well. And most importantly, providing credit and the right credit applications back to the researcher for doing that sharing and tracking that and so forth. There's a lot to be done in that space, but it's something that I think that we've got a fair handle on, at least a start. And I think it's also possible to create sustainable funding models for some of these databases. And there's a couple of, well, maybe they're radical, maybe they're not, ideas that about how we might work together to do that. So big data versus research data. A lot of people, there's so much hype around big data, huge data sets, and a lot of science doesn't have large data sets. They have small data sets. They may have many of them, but they have small data sets. But also the emphasis is a little bit different. So if we take, this is the life cycle, the data life cycle that we've structured our symposium around. And the big data focus tends to be on, well, if we had all these data, we had them all together, maybe I should tip this up a little. This is what we should do. Well, we could do, right? We could analyze them. We could get new insights from all of the data by putting them into a giant repository and doing analytics on this. And of course, I'm sure all of you are familiar with the Fourth Paradigm book that came out, sponsored by a Microsoft conference, about taking science and moving science forward more rapidly and all of that. I don't want to go into that hype. But all of that is around, if we had the data and it were normalized and it were joined up and it were all of these things that are very, very important and difficult to do to get the data together, then we could get more value out of them and do that kind of analytics. And that's a big if. And in fact, research data is still back here with the core problems of annotating the data, normalizing the data, joining them up in a lot of cases. Okay. Maybe that's the rebound effect, or maybe that's telling me my time is up. I'm not quite sure what the story is. But anyway, so research data really needs to focus on different problems that are before we get to the great analytics things we can do on the data. And again, many of these data sets are smaller. So I just picked up some random, we're going to hear later today about Figshare, a great repository for helping you store your data. There's a lot of other databases out there for doing that. One of the interesting things I want to point out is what the Australian National Data Services, they've done. I think last count, they've got about 60,000 different isolated data sets and in their repository building up. But these are data sets that have not been joined up, normalized. You can't do analytics cross easily, horizontally across these data sets. And they have set a new vision for saying what their focus over the next few years is going to be, move the data sets from a bunch of isolated data sets into more of a discipline-specific repository approach. Those are putting my words on, you can see their words up here, but I'm putting my words on what they're trying to do. But that's really what it's about, right? Is getting more value out of it, getting those data sets that have the same common terminology, the same normalized values, and the same understanding about where they came from, the methods that were created, that used to create them. Very important, for example, in imaging, where you can't just say, I created this image, especially a 3D MRI image or something like that. I created this image and compare it to something else. You have to say exactly what transforms you did on that to create the data so it can be compared with something else. Very important metadata work that needs to be captured as part of this effort. So problem number one, barriers to data disclosure. Why aren't people sharing it? And I just highlighted a couple of things that focus on credit, right? Getting credit back. And obviously one of the key ways to do that is to link the paper and data sets together. A lot of work, great work going on doing that. That gives you citation and so forth. But data sets, at least, now this is an opinion, which, there's probably 260 different opinions about this in the room, but that I think data sets are going to become more and more things by themselves, where the data sets, in some cases, we're working with researchers who are publishing their data sets more frequently and more granularly than gets done in the paper later. And those data sets are being reused as part of analytics, and they need to get credit for that. And I know some examples of data repositories that are starting to do that. When somebody does an analytic that goes across multiple data sets, they monitor that, and they give reports back to the user that says, your data set was used for this. And that's clearly going to be part of the infrastructure of credit in the future. And that's a really important thing for getting this data going. Again, working with researchers to help increase that. And then I've taken this is one of those slides that I've taken around to. Now I've talked to, 6 or 7 funding bodies and research institutions and so forth to sort of validate the list and stuff. And I think this is probably most of us in this room understand what's going on here. But there's ways we can get around that, and that's providing really help in getting that over. So just a little side, this is a little sidetrack, just to give Peter some ammunition in his next talk. He's talking about supplemental data. Supplemental data is an approach that was taken a few years ago. We'll just add supplemental data sets to the published paper as it goes in. The publisher will put those aside on together with the paper and put them out there and make them available and stuff. And assertion for me, that's not the answer. That's not getting us anywhere, right? It has problems by itself. So far, Elsevier has had a fairly aggressive going after doing this, 15% at most. In many cases, that depends on how and what things you count. Between 9 and 15% of papers in 2012 had any kind of supplemental file associated with it. Most of those are videos, either the author talking about it or something like that. Only 1% had data sets now mind you, I haven't looked at the detail of all of these, but those are things that were Excel spreadsheets or something like that, right? Only another 1% had zip files, which has multiple stuff thrown together. So we're talking about a very small amount that actually have, and then there's no rules for putting those data sets or whatever you do together with a paper. No rules. Some cases there's review, but mostly not, right? Where is that going? And a lot of not publishers, because publishers don't make those rules about that, but editors, who's in charge of the journals, are pulling back from that, saying, this is not getting us anywhere. This is not providing the value. And in fact, Elsevier has a very aggressive policy of saying, put your data in a repository that is shared, that is open, and we'll link to that. And we have a linking program. There are 35 databases we link to today, bidirectionally from the paper to the data set, from the data set to the paper, to try to join these up. And we have a strong program for adding databases as soon as we can process them and work through them and get all of the APIs and everything else sorted out. And that provides a much stronger value for really connecting these things together. So anyway, that's just an aside, because I think of that as an aside, but maybe I'm the one missing the boat here. It certainly could be. Issue number 2, sustainability. This is probably most of you are familiar with the research database issue that comes out every year from nucleic acids research. This is the 2012 issue. The 2013 issue just came out. 2012 issue said there were 1,380 databases in this one discipline alone. It seems like there's an issue about joining them up. Anyway, there are 1,380 databases growing at between 8 and 10%. The growth over 1,512 in the issue that was put out just this month for this year, that's a 9.5% growth of databases alone. The data themselves are growing over 100% in that one area here. And this issue called out the big issue concern that they had, which was funding, sustainable funding. And they highlighted 4 databases that were going out of business because there's not continued funding for these databases carrying them forward. Databases are funded by grants, by research grants, to do something new. Well, after they're established, they're not new, so where does the funding come from? And I know this is a tricky thing for me, Elsevier, to talk about funding and models and business models and stuff, but I think we need to get this out on the table. And I do think that there's something that we can do together that can move us forward. So I've got some brainstorm ideas for how to do that. Here's another article from Nature News last year also, and it highlighted these databases that are also going out of business, that is, that don't have any funding going forward. That just, again, just one point. The one point is we've got to face up to the fact that this is very expensive to do. And I'll talk a little bit about costs and where that costs go and stuff, but sustainability. There are many databases. Can we fund this from various different kinds of models? Sorry for this busy slide. This is a slide that I created, taken from a study by JISC that was done by Neil Beagrie Associates. They surveyed a bunch of data repository owners, mostly UK and Europe. I think they did a couple of in the US. And said, where are you spending your time? Where is the money going that's going into these supporting these databases? And a quarter of the effort is going into the ingest part. That is taking the data from the lab and getting it into the database. That's a lot of effort to do that. And it's a lot of effort to throw onto the researcher to try to do. And that by itself is a barrier. That effort to do that requires skills, different skill sets, different approach, different mindset, taxonomy thinking, informatics thinking. It's a different thing than doing research, and that by itself is a barrier, and that's, I think, a key takeaway from this. And then there's other things in there as well. You can look at this in your own time. Again, an excellent report by JISC and Neil Beagrie that I have. If you just look up JISC keeping research data safe, you'll get report number 1, report number 2. Good reports to look at. So pain points, and I'm not trying to give a pitch for Elsevier and stuff, but I think we do have some things to offer, particularly in this space, because of the issues that I've highlighted, and that's what I want to talk about. Elsevier, or Read Elsevier Parent and so forth, has strengths, particularly in taxonomies. Maybe many of you know this or don't know. We have over 30 formal taxonomies that we maintain in a variety of subject areas across science. Those are the ones that we are owners of. We do ourselves for our own. We do, of course, indexing of every article that comes in, manual or semi-automated indexing for every subject that we publish in. And of course, we publish in every subject. We have either taxonomies that we use and borrow, or we have taxonomies that we've created ourselves that add value to do that. We create special projects on top of these taxonomies. So this is, in my view, one of our real core expertise. So we have a whole group dedicated to content enhancement that does taxonomy maintenance, indexing, and applying standard nomenclatures to content and data. And we do this for databases as well. And I think other publishers, again, this is not unique to Elsevier, all publishers do this as part of the effort that they do. We also do at-scale analytics, whether you are familiar with some of our colleagues, MedAI. I'm not going to go in and talk about the detail of these, but we do very large scale analytics in open public data and in medical records data and so forth, and publish the analytics at the end of that. We also, tricky part, how I phrase this, how we put this out, but we also take freely available data, not we, but I mean many companies take freely available data and turn those into task-specific applications. That is, applications that are ready for not a researcher, but a corporate use to solve a particular task, right? So turn a bunch of data about manufacturing and create a database specifically helping a researcher, a designer answer the question about what is the right plastic to put into this harsh environment. That's a targeted answer, and that actually is a way to get money out of the free data. And I think that's one of the points I'm going to. And we have a couple of things that we do in that area. Now, just a quick little about what we're doing now. I'm heading a new group called Research Data Services in Elsevier. Anita Devard is my colleague, and many of you probably know her a lot better than you know me because she's been involved in data stuff and future of research and future communications for a long time. And we are the Research Data Services group looking at, hey, these are key problems. Is there a way we can help get at these key problems? Key principles right to start with. Right, so what are our goals? Increase data shared, increase the value of the data that are shared, right? So not just get it out there, but particularly focusing on increasing the value and breaking down the barriers to getting the data shared, right? And then also looking at, okay, how can we get this sustainable? How can we create process, tools, whatever it takes to make the ingest, getting the content in more sustainable, and also maybe provide some more funding in some way for the databases themselves. The principle, open data, let's please get that out on the table here. This is not in any way talking about Elsevier ownership of data, Elsevier, copyrighted, nothing to do with that. This is not anything that we're talking about. We're not talking to any database owners about taking over the databases or anything like that. We are working with database owners to say, okay, how can we help move it forward, right? But this is not about owning or copyright or any of those issues around data. We are fully believers in open, shared data for the academic community. Collaboration, collaborative. That is, we're not going to do something. We're not trying to create an idea, push it out there and say, what do you think? We're working every time. This year is spent in working specific collaborations with the academic community to see how we can move forward and being transparent about what we're doing and including the business models. Research data management is a complicated thing. That's sort of like the overall big picture. I'm not going to go into diving into details of it. But if you look at all the different parts of the data lifecycle we're talking about, taking care of data from beginning to end, it could be called a research data management whole business. And there's lots of, you look up research data management on Google today, and you'll get every large university has their own program starting from scratch on research data management and how to take care of this from end to end. All I want to say here is that we have specific pilots aimed at understanding what's going on in each of these parts and how we might help move forward. By pilot, I mean working together with a research community or a university to say, what can we do to add value? Specifically looking at that. And then again, I'm not going to go through all these in detail, but these are the pilots. You can look at the stuff later. And I want to highlight one of them that we have a poster on. Anita and Kirsten have a poster on the project that we're doing with AIDA and EarthChem, trying to take data from the laboratory, get it into the repository, see what that takes, see what skills that needs, see what process that needs, see what effort that needs, and where are we going to go with that. And by the way, there's no financial thing here. We're talking about what does it take this year to do that. We'll worry about what comes after that when we figure out what it takes, and then how do we make that sustainable. That's what we're trying to do here. And then again, around the circle, we have pilots in all of these areas looking at what can we do and where can we add value. Again, given the stuff that we had before. So we've got little slides on what the benefits are for these. Actually, I think we have a flyer in your packet that has the research data service. So this is the disclosure service that we're creating, that we're piloting to see if there's a place for us to help out for this end-to-end. And so we've got the listing of what the benefits are for the researcher. I want to talk final effort on one point here, and that's the funding models for sustainable databases. This is sort of a really messy little slide, but sort of like how do the databases get funded today? Right? There's a lot of money coming from funding bodies going to the academic researchers. And then there's also money that goes directly into the data repositories, and the academic institutions themselves add money to the data repositories. And then the white is the free. You deposit your stuff for free, and you get your data out for free. And by the way, we let corporates get all of that data for free as well. That's nice. What could we do? What we could do instead, and this is actually already starting to happen, especially with the new, a lot of organizations. I've got really good examples that we don't have time to go into, but one simple model is the sort of open access, gold open access model, right? Pay to deposit your data. That's going to take an estimated, well, depends on who you talk to, but that may take I attended a conference, the International Data Curation Conference in January in Amsterdam, and there was a special workshop on the cost of doing these databases. And the estimate that came out of that group was that it can take 10%, average 10% of the cost of the research data itself, of the research funding itself, to maintain these databases, to keep that going. If you add that number up, it gets pretty big fast. I saw one estimate from Marine Explorer, a company who's looking at marine data, and just in that area alone, they estimate $5 billion a year to take care of the data, to do that. So a gold open access model means increasing all of the funding bottles right up front by 10%. Interesting model. I'm not sure this is right. But what we do today, there's lots of companies who are making money taking, especially in translational medicine, taking data in drug trial data, matching it up with individual genomic profiling, and getting predictive biomarkers of whether this person is going to have an adverse effect by that drug in that trial, and selling that back to pharma. They're taking the freely available data and selling it back. One of the ideas we could do is say, together, maybe we could build some of those analytic services or some of those task-oriented analytics, and then license the data back to the repository. So charge the corporates for uses for those data where we can, and then charge the license fee, pass the license fee back to help fund the database. This actually works quite well in many areas. Right now, we let all the other companies go out and build these analytics, and we don't charge them a license fee for using the data that they're getting, that they're making their whole business out of. Interesting idea. Anyway, this was an interesting point I heard near the end of that conference. Somebody said, we can't do this by ourselves. They're talking about building models for sustainable funding models. We can't do this by ourselves. We need somebody with business savvy to work with us. So that's my talk.